Now you're very welcome along to a Saturday edition of the Huddle Breakdown. Enda here with James and Alan as we look back on two games and look ahead to the Hearts game tomorrow at 12 o'clock. There is also big news in terms of Celtic this week, or potentially big news. We're going to hash out whether it means anything or not. But Mark Lawwell and Joe Dudgeon have left the club. So that is Celtic's first team scout and his compatriot, Mark Lawwell, is they are gone out of the club. So we're going to be hashing out whether or not that means anything in the long term strategy of the club and what that means in terms of the power struggle that's going on at Celtic Park this season. Alan, James, how are you? Happy weekend. I never see us at the weekend. It's kind of freaky, you know. It's like I'm interrupting your you time.
Yeah, still got, pajamas on.
Mm.
You're interrupting my Saturday morning cartoons. I was watching Bugs Bunny about 10 minutes ago, so this is very annoying.
Yeah, put your Cocoa Pops away. Then we'll get into the real nitty gritty of Celtic Football Club. Well, I guess we'll start with the news in that Mark Lawwell and Joe Dudgeon have left the club. This comes off the back of the January transfer window. I think that's very, very blatant in the statements that have been made so far. Chris Sutton has described it as them falling on the sword for the failings of the transfer window of January. Um, Alan, I mean, we've spoken about this like for the last 4 or 5 years of the Huddle Breakdown, well before Mark Lawwell was at the club as well. But like the first team scout and the people who are involved in bringing players to the club, it's been a very complicated, convoluted strategy that seems to be going on here, and now it would seem that they are getting the blame for the failings of the transfers. So the club seem to be laying it at their door that they were responsible for the players coming in, and Brendan Rodgers was just working with what they give him. So that's where I'm reading this, but I'm not sure if that's necessarily true.
Yeah, it's difficult to say. We did, if people remember, when Ange Postecoglou was hired on the show, news on the topic of is the club turning into a modern version of a football club, or did we just get lucky with Ange? And I think the answer to that is clear. We just got lucky with Ange, and as soon as Ange left, the semblance of being a modern football club behind the scenes seemed to be, very little evidence of that. There was, in my mind, always doubts that Mark Lowell actually was doing a job that he was qualified to do, which I can't say any less bluntly than that in terms of what was his actual role at Man City, what was his day-to-day operational responsibilities versus that of being the head of recruitment at Celtic. Um, and by any token, that hasn't been successful. But then I'm still skeptical that whether getting rid of these two individuals will actually change that or not, to be honest with you, because it's unsuccessful for other more inherent reasons within the club. It takes a team of people to do this well, and it takes a team of talented people to do it well. Um, so yeah, no surprise. I was actually told on the 1st of February that this was going to happen, and I've kept stum as I was asked to do. So there you go. So no great surprise in this. Um, timing's a bit odd, I think, in terms of But then again, I suppose at least you could say, well, get new people in before the summer. But again, I'll hold fire on that because I'd like to see the whole ideology, strategy, thought leadership, let's call it that, of the club in terms of this crucial activity. Where's that coming from, and what is it? Because that's the bit I'm still skeptical about, really.
Hmm. James, if Celtic Football Club over the last couple of years was filmed like Succession, this would probably be the season finale, or at least the penultimate episode of season 2 or 3. I mean, this is really Mark Lawwell and Joe Dudgeon taking the dive, taking the hit for what was the recruitment process over the last couple of years. And interestingly enough, there was also a little snipe at Ange Postecoglou in the statement that was made in the club laying Mark Lawwell's hire at his door. Um, and that may well be true. I believe it actually was true that it was Ange that looked for Mark Lawwell to come to the club. So the club are very much distancing themselves from this as the power struggle for who has the biggest macho man muscles in the boardroom or at the club goes on.
I mentioned back sometime in December, I think, that if the January window did not go as we had hoped it would, that we might be looking at a sort of civil war within football operations. The way things appear to be lining up, you know, that's overstating it a bit, but that seems to be what has manifested, and one side has won the war to a degree, and that appears to be Brendan Rodgers. That's how I would read this. And if you look at even just some of the reporting, and again, here's some buzz, um, but there were players being presented to Rodgers. Araujo was probably the most prominently reported. I suspect there were others that the recruitment team had brought to him and said, "Hey, let's sign these people." It was again pretty well reported and sourced that Araujo was well down the line in getting signed. That was the I think it was the Portuguese left back, and playing at Estoril, if I recall, and that Rodgers basically vetoed it pretty late in the stage. So I think it seems to me, and again, I'm reading between the lines, what was happening was that following the summer window, which I think most people would agree that it didn't go very well, where Rodgers was relatively passive, that he started to get more directly involved, was not happy with the level of quality of players being brought to him. Um, as a result, basically vetoed a bunch of them. And they tried to patch together some players that Rodgers liked sometime in the autumn into January. And when you're dealing with a relatively small number of potential signings, you're not taking a holistic approach to the process. The guys Rodgers knows is not going to be a database that's that large, and trying to get those people signed in January is not easy, for all the reasons that we've talked about, and they're well known about that window, and specifically to this window. So I think it was just a cluster F of these factors, and I think understandably, given how poor the last two in particular have gone, something had to change. I don't like, again, this goes to me, again, this is about Dermot Desmond. This is, or likely about Dermot Desmond. This is actually moving more towards the gravitational force of manager's God, that we've talked about over and over. So this is reverting back towards giving Ange and his agent all of the power. So now, are we just substituting Ange for Brendan? That seems to me the direction, and the idea that we're going to patch together a robust recruitment infrastructure ahead of the summer's window between now and you know what's probably got to be April 1st to do it the right way is or even a reasonable way is a tall order. So we may be looking at something similar to what it pivoted towards in January, which is guys Brendan knows and likes, um, but in a window that will be less difficult to deal in.
Yeah. Well, according to reports in Ireland, Adam Idah was a Brendan Rodgers signing. That
Yeah, I mean, it's
as soon
clear.
as he became available, or Rodgers was told he was going to be available, he was someone that he went after. And look, that might look like a masterstroke if Adam Idah keeps scoring goals the way he's scoring goals, and if he develops in the way that some of the underage coaches within Ireland that have worked with him closely, and even the Irish coaches who've worked with him, if he continues to develop that way, then yeah, he could be a potential brilliant signing for Celtic. But if he continues to be a bit part player who has niggly injuries, can't get any form, falls out of confidence, etc., as he has done throughout his career so far, then that could be a disaster of a signing. So it's sort of a coin flip scenario as opposed to a strategic one. My final question on this before we move on to actual football is in terms of the summer. So now Celtic not only need obvious replacement within the squad, they need to buy in some good scouts and head of recruitment. The recent books were fairly healthy, Alan, to put it lightly, let's say. At the minute, so let's just say in the world of football directors, because that seems to be where modern football is going, where there's almost a transfer window for these guys now. The likes of Dan Ashworth, who is going to United from Newcastle United, Manchester United from Newcastle United, he's going to cost them around 20 million. And he's the top guy. He's the guy that everybody wants right now. He's going to cost 20 million. So like in the real world, Celtic should be spending about 10 million for their head of recruitment here, right? To get the best guy possible, because that will save them from spending little bits of money all the time over a long period of time. It's sort of like false economy where you buy loads of little shitty things from the pound shop and they break all the time. So you have to continue to buy more as opposed to buying right once. So that's where I think Celtic should go. Instead of putting aside 50 million on a transfer budget, maybe put 40 million towards the transfer budget and then a good chunk of money towards getting the right head of recruitment. But I don't think that's going to happen.
Well, I agree with the principle of what you're saying, and I've always said this, that, and especially if you look at Celtic's books, the club is in a position to have not just very good, and I take your point about if it's cost you 20 million for head of recruitment, then even non-playing um, skills are becoming inflated in the market. But Celtic should be able to have a world-class scouting and network. But you put Dan Ashworth character, you put him into a dysfunctional club with bickering executives and a shallow talent pool of people working under him, he's not going to succeed. I don't care whether he's cost 20 million, 30 million, or 1 million, right? So the fundamental point is to have a talent pool of people doing the work, and it doesn't have to be too many, but it's got to be consistent. It's got to be, strongly on message, on strategy, clear vision, clear goals, with a decent budget. And it's not even about budget, it's about talent and finding the best people to do that and fitting them together and giving them the space organizationally and giving them the support organizationally, that providing they're doing the job, then you're happy with it and the parameters are all clear. That's what Celtic need to do. I agree with what James is saying. I think it can also be true at the same time that the people we had in these roles weren't very good, right? So it wasn't just a case of, oh well, this model, Lawwell and Dudgeon failed because the club wants to give Rodgers all the power. I don't necessarily believe that can be the case. I mean, in a senior role like that in any business, and this is what I was kind of hearing was, oh, it's just really difficult to do business in this window, and I get that, right? It was a tough environment because of the FSR considerations closed down a lot of the English market. The English market tends to fuel the European market to a large extent. Um, you know, Players not wanting to come to Scotland, especially when you get into the more talented, higher earner sort of wage brackets. That is true. All that, right? But for you to essentially say, "Oh, I can't do my job because it's too difficult," which is essentially, when you boil it down, what they were saying. It's just not good enough for a club like Celtic, or it shouldn't be. So I accept that we don't want to move to a model whereby it's Brendan Rodgers and whoever's the next manager and whatever players they happen to know. Um, and I also agree with you that we need to actually put some money aside to say, right, but it isn't necessarily about money. It's about strategy. It's about organization. It's about roles and responsibilities. It's about vision, and it's about leadership. All these things have to be lined up, as it don't matter who you put in to these roles and how much you pay them, frankly, if you don't have all those things lined up. So that's what the club needs to get clear. Stop this bickering internally and get lined up behind what this project should be.
Well, and this is partly why I've talked about, and I know Alan has too, and agrees with this, is that the key role in all of this has been one of architect. Who's going to build the organization and the structures and the culture in order to facilitate what needs to happen competitively? And in fairness to Dudgeon and Mark Lawwell, they appear to have been plugged in to a structure that they did not design. So this is why I thought it didn't make sense to begin with, which is you're going to lift out these guys from City Football Group, and think that they're going to be able to replicate what they're doing at City Financial Group or football group as if, you know, it's just some easy thing to transfer. They don't. Celtic doesn't have the scouting network, doesn't have the financial resources, doesn't have an astrophysicist that's designed their analytics department. Like it's just a completely different animal. And there was some reporting that there were some very specific market parameters put on what they were shopping in, i.e., 23 and under, less than 5 million transfer, and X range in wage bill. And, is that, I agree with Al, like, okay, well, deal with it, right? Do your job within if that's the parameters that you're given, you should still be able to do a good job within that. But right. That's an architecture that's being pushed down on them by somebody. I think we have a pretty good guess of who those people are. And does that make sense? And, I retweeted something, I don't know if it was last week or the week before, about where the market has moved. And the likelihood is that sub 23 age group is getting picked over now, is being incredibly competitive. We've talked about this in recent months. The Brightons of the world, the Brentfords, that have big money, that are going into the 17 to 19 to 21-year-old markets and buying up all the 5 to 7 million, or even 3 million. And we can't compete with those clubs because of what they offer relative to pathways and um, and getting into the English Premier League. So, and even the wages that they can pay, that kind of thing. So the inefficiency now is almost the neglected middle-aged players. you know so this is, again, back to who's the strategist, who's really smart about navigating things. And I don't think we have that person still, so we're constantly chasing our tail in a reactionary, bad architecture. And this is where, until that architect comes in and stays and is empowered, it's probably going to just be more of the same.
Yeah, I think it's quite similar to like the Red Bull scenario of the coaches that come through the Red Bull system, and even some of the players. Once they leave the Red Bull system, a lot of them have looked quite incompetent. But that doesn't mean they were bad coaches the entire time. That just means they've gone to another club where they don't have the same systems in place. And if you don't have the same systems in place, then what they're good at isn't available for them to thrive in
So
those sort of organizations.
this is probably the most fundamental aspect of the analytics revolution, the data revolution in sport, is the degree to which coaches have been overvalued historically. The role of managers. Now, when your manager is God and you're picking the players and all that stuff, so that's the arbitrage, is that you basically, you segment these roles and the decisions and do them at a high level, rather than having one person do all this crap. And they might be a great head coach, they might be a great tactician, but maybe they're not great at picking players or managing budgets or managing human beings and all of that stuff. So the whole idea is specialization. And again, I'm just explaining what it is. I'm not saying I like it or dislike it. That's the reality of the clubs that are successful, and that's what you're seeing. Look at what happened at Brighton. When what was his name, went to Chelsea, and then they brought in it's
Graham
Saturday
Potter and
morning.
Deserby.
Deserby. I still have Saturday morning brain. I haven't had my second coffee yet. So these guys that come into some of these clubs that are well run, you even look at Casado at Brighton, and then he goes to Chelsea, right? So there's almost a laundering that can go on with players and talent. If you're set up well, the dumb money is going to keep buying this stuff from you that don't understand the attribution of why the engine is working. Um, and this is what I've been saying for a while. We're dumb money, and that's we're not doing a smart job in allocating resources and figuring out all these kind of modern attribution aspects. And that's all the kind of the dour view. The positive view is, even within this context, and we saw this with Ange. I mean, the last two windows, particularly the summer window, was catastrophically bad, like to a degree that is just unbelievable. So any change, even if it's back towards a manager as God, is probably going to be better than what we had, at least initially. Because again, he's going to cherry pick like Ange did early in his tenure, people that we can get that he knows. So we're probably, we still have some cherry picking to do this summer, maybe. But it's not durable, likely. It's not long term, any of those other issues. But at least for this summer, hopefully it could be, you know, better than what we've had.
Yeah, no, I definitely do. Just to, as we move away from this, I definitely do think it should be one or the other. It can't be 60% in this model, 40% in this model. It needs to be either it's Brendan Rodgers who picks the players who he wants to get in, and he has a team of people that bring those players in, or it's the recruitment team that do it for the club, and he has to work within the structures that the club has in place to future proof it. And if you're doing manager as God, do it in 3-year cycles. You know, you plan for the fact that it's manager as God. Plan for the fact that within 3 years we're going to need to rebuild the squad because this manager's not going to be here, and we're going to need a new manager who's going to be the next manager, and then already start working on that. You can't have it both ways or have one foot in each camp without going full in on either of them, because what you end up with is the likes of Yang, etc., joining the club, and Brendan Rodgers coming and thinking, well, these guys are clearly not up to the standard that I want, so I'm going to bring in Idah in in the January transfer window, all known. So we'll move past that.
Sorry,
Alan,
just
go ahead.
to be fair, I think the club was trying to implement the model that we probably prefer to see. It's just that they recruited really badly into their key roles, right? So I think if the will is there, I don't think Brendan Rodgers throughout his career. You've seen this. I don't think he wants to be the head of recruitment. I don't think he wants to be spending his days talking to agents, right? He wants to be on the training pitch. So I hope, and I believe, based on that, we will go. We will continue to work towards a model where the recruitment team do what they do and the manager works with them. We just need to recruit better. We need better talent in those key positions because to me, how catastrophic was it? You got to think with Celtic, especially domestically, there's a huge margin for error here in recruitment, right? A huge margin for error, and if you can't find wingers that can dominate SPFL level opposition, you are not good at your job, and that's the end of it as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I think that sums it up pretty well. So we'll move on to actual on the pitch action. We're not going to be all doom and gloom on the podcast this week, I promise, because we do have two wins to talk about. One slightly better than the other. Let's be honest. 3-1 win over Motherwell in the depth. Idah pulling it out of the bag in the second half with a really lovely header, and it has to be said that that second goal that he scored was actually really, really good as well. So we'll talk about that, and we're also going to be talking about the 7-1 hammering of Dundee. So to sum it all up, James, Celtic are back. We're going to win the league. Everything has changed, and we just have the winning formula now to keep battering teams until the end of the season. Is that's right?
Certainly possible. I think what we saw this past week was a combination of some tweaks, meaning that the dropping Kyogo to go to Adamita, either substitution at halftime at Motherwell or from the beginning on Wednesday against Dundee. That's a move. That's a material, significant change by the manager in the composition of the squad at a very important position. Obviously, Yang coming in and doing well in both games has been impactful. But I think the majority of what occurred in the last two games is positive variance, and particularly as it relates to crossing and resulting shots. So I pulled some data for this. I told you guys I was going to do this. So, on brand. So prior to um, the game on Sunday at Motherwell, in whatever number of games that is before that, I can't do the math that quick, 23 games, whatever, we had 14.29 cumulative XG on shots from crosses. Okay. That's That's XG. That's the quality of the chances in cumulative on 85 shots. Uh, the post shot XG was 12.72. So that means our finishing on these wasn't great. And I think, that aligns with the eye test, probably how we all feel about the season. We've got a lot of kind of aerial sitters that have been missed, that kind of thing. So I think that aligns pretty well. Only 9 goals. Okay, so again, that's that piece that I talk about relative to uncontrollable risk, which is how well are opposition keepers keeping the ball out. And that happened to have fallen in crosses disproportionately so far this season, where opposition keepers have done a good job. Um, and again, I did it on a unit basis, on a per shot basis. So the post shot XG per shot was 0.489, and uh, the XG per shot was 0.168. Okay, post shot XG is always higher than pre-shot, obviously, because the majority of shots aren't on target. So in the last 2 games, we've had 15 shots off of crosses for 2.48 in XG, 2.96 in post shot XG. So again, whereas we had finishing that was materially negative combined with good opposition keeper play, now we've got decent finishing that's improving the quality of the chance, and we had 4 goals. Okay, so again, small sample, it's 15 shots, but generally speaking, the opposition keepers didn't do a great job at saving any of these. The post shot XG per shot was 0.37. So again, that compares to 0.489. So the average quality of the shots were actually lower than they've been, even though these other 2 factors flowed in. And the uh, average chance was actually pretty much the same, 0.166. So when I deconstruct all of that, this is why I say, to me, it looks like, generally speaking, variance. And that doesn't mean that we can't swing back the rest of the season, right? So it absolutely could happen because, as I said, our finishing wasn't great. Maybe Idah is a better aerial finisher, for example, at striker. Maybe that's sustainable. I don't know. I haven't seen enough of him, and I don't have any kind of data to analyze on that historically. So it's plausible, given his athleticism and size, it's possible. Um, Maybe Yang has turned a corner and all of a sudden is going to be a more consistent crosser of the ball at higher quality, that kind of thing. Again, plausible. He's shown this kind of volatility in his tenure already, where he can have these great games and whip great crosses in, and then the next game he looks like he doesn't. He has 2 left feet, that kind of thing. So I think if I have a guess, an analysis is it's likely more to do with variance, with a slight positivity, meaning that maybe if we stick with Idah, that there's some upside there that would help us the rest of the season. But the other inherent part to all this is that aerial crosses, in particular, are quite volatile. Um, so you're when you're dealing with just you know 11 or 12 games left, whatever's left now. Um, that can swing quite violently. You get a windy day. You get a team that's much better defensively than Dundee, for example. Dundee is atrocious defensively um, overall. So those kind of factors. So that's my analysis for.
On the striker situation, Alan, and this is all related to crosses as well. What has changed in the reasoning for Idah to, let's, I'm not going to go as far as saying thriving, but at least being successful within the system, and Kyogo, who has broken the 20 goal mark the last 2 seasons, who can't seem to get into the squad right now. So, like, for me, it's startling that Celtic's best player for the last 2 years has fallen off a cliff this season, and somebody who has failed to make any inroads within the Norwich setup over the last 4 years seems to be having good success. So why does it seem to be more suited to Idah than Kyogo?
Yeah, I mean it's if you're going to have a striker who's going to thrive on almost precision crafted attacking play, whereby you're ending the move with a low hard cross across the 6 yard box, and Kyogo absolutely thrives on that kind of service. However it is contrived and however it emerges, if that's the finishing move, if you like, if you're either not willing or not able to do that, then it looks like that Kyogo is going to struggle to be as productive as uh, as he could be. I mean, he's not like an Alan Shearer type striker for the older ones, who if he's maybe not having a good day, he's quite happy to belt one in the top corner from 30 yards just to feel better and keep the goal tally going type of thing. No, Kyogo was almost precision engineered to finish off these 6 yard box type chances, and mainly I don't think we're intending not to serve him well. As I've said all season, I think it mainly comes down to the quality of the wing play to actually and I don't just mean the wing play. I don't just mean the wingers. I mean the ability of the team to create the scenarios that I've talked about there. So if we look at what changed at Motherwell, then so what Brendan Rodgers said, and this not my words, I'm paraphrasing Brendan Rodgers, was that we were actually too anxious, we were too eager to get the ball forward, and this is what I've been trying to bang on about all season is that we weren't terrible in the first half against Motherwell because we were slow and ponderous and because we were passing the ball around the horseshoe. As I said on Twitter, I was aspiring to the horseshoe because if you see the horseshoe, you're controlling the ball, you're controlling the field. We didn't do any of that. Why didn't we do any of that? Because we kept giving the ball away. Why do we keep giving the ball away? Because we keep trying ridiculously long straight through balls to try and get Kyogo on the ball earlier because he's really fast and probably Maida as well. And we kept rushing everything in our play. There was no composure. There was no control. It was how can we get the ball forward quicker? It was the antithesis of slow and ponderous, but we're just rubbish at it. What changed in the second half is we stopped trying these stupid through balls and we actually put crosses in from, you know, the middle of the final third and on. So we were just basically trying to hit the front from better areas, and that's what improved mainly. And we just got a bit more control of the game. We controlled the ball. We controlled the territory. We should aspire to the horseshoe. We need to get that control back. That's what the team has been lacking. We're not controlling the game well enough. And that's the first thing. And then second of all is, I think, and we talked about this before the Motherwell game. We completely played into their hands in terms of what was their big skill. Their big skill was that they weren't going to get broken on because their defenders were going to sit in a line, and they're very good at the counter attack. So what did we do? We kept coughing up the ball to Blair Spittle, who then played lovely through balls to Theo Bear. Five chances Spittle set up in that first half. He had 144 pass packing score, right? He absolutely destroyed us, right? So anyway, we got control of the game in the second half. But I think what with Idah and the team, if you don't have players capable of playing the kind of low crosses that Kyogo thrives on, if it's going to be more of the good old fashioned lump it in the box type of cross, then Idah at least gives you a fighting chance of making something from that. What I was pleased about against Dundee, and James is absolutely right. If you're going to attribute why did the Dundee thing happen? They are terrible. I mean, to have three or four goals right in the middle of the 6 yard box in front of your goalkeeper and nobody laying a glove on any Celtic player is just it's just terrible. But what I did like to see was that Taylor's goal was the one I really liked because you had Taylor and O'Reilly almost pushing each other out of the way to score it, right? So fine, if you're gonna play crosses, play them from as near to the opposition goal as you can and get people in the box. Because if you've got a player like Idah, who again scored two fantastic headers, who's at least going to make life difficult for the opposition, other players can feed off that if they also get into the box. So get more players into the box. And then more prosaically, there is no doubt that in that first half against Motherwell, I mean, Cal McGregor was just in that pushed forward position. I think he gave away more passes than he would normally give away in 3 full matches, right? And O'Reilly clearly has been off the boil. Matt O'Reilly was back to his best on against Dundee, and that makes such a difference to this team. Unfortunately, it's not. So I don't think it's a case that, like as James said, Yang suddenly turned into this world-beating winger. We've seen this performance from Yang before. The home game against Aberdeen, in particular, comes to mind. And as James says, it's just as likely that the next game he's going to look like he's never played the game before. So I don't think anything's radically changed. I think with Idah in the team, if you're not going to play to Kyogo's strength, you might as well have the big lad, and you might as well get some crosses in the box. You might as well create a bit of attacking chaos, such that you at least set an environment where some of that positive variance can occur. But other than that, every game's going to be a nail biter between now and the end of the season. Fundamentally, I don't think we've kind of suddenly hit on the elixir of coherence. I think we just, as James said, we just got a run of good finishing or good variance,
Yeah,
and
and I would.
two really bad goalkeepers.
Well, two poor keepers, a really poor defensive team in Dundee, and their ability to be where they are at in the table for the most part is because they've been exceptionally effective at finishing set pieces. And fortunately, that didn't manifest against us, and it really wouldn't have mattered given the nature of the game. If they scored a couple of corners, it would have been 7-2 or 7-3, so it didn't really matter. Um, but I will say again, it's sliding scale, kind of like what I said relative to recruitment, and we can't be as bad. Um, you know, to Alan's point, it's almost like we were trying to play narrow without playing narrow, right? That's almost an incoherence. I mean, you're trying these kind of through balls, Narotsky trying to hit, um, one of the eights in the seam in the half space central without kind of building around that to focus on playing narrow, right? So this goes back to Alan and I saying, well, I'll play 4-4-2 diamond or, something like 4-2, 3-4, 2-1, that kind of thing, where you've got 3 or 4 guys or even 5 guys central and narrow, so that if that kind of pass from Navratsky doesn't come off, you've got the packs to hunt and to win it back in counter pressing. And I think we do counter press very intensely. It's reflected in the data, but we're not playing narrow. So if you're trying these through balls to Kyogo, or you're trying to hit, O'Reilly with his back to goal, in the half space, in between their lines, that it's always tight. And we don't have world class center backs making those passes. Again, that's not McGregor's game really either. We and it's not Awada's game. So if you're going to play a system wide and then create space using width to throw central, and you don't have the players to do it, that's and you do it against Motherwell, who's a good counterattacking team. Like, that's how you get the first half. So a little more meat on the bone as far as what Alan's saying. And going to the horseshoe, going to Idah, I'm concerned about the variance here, but it's at least more coherent to me. So, I've been calling for something radical. You know, is dropping Kyogo radical and putting Eda in and kind of abandoning this whatever it is we've been trying to do centrally. I guess it's not as radical as I'd like, but it's at least progress. I could see I'm a lot more optimistic now if we stick to this. Then I'm not sure it's going to be enough, but I would say that the left tail is getting cut off a little bit, meaning that we're going to lose the the league by 10 points, right? If we kept persisting like the first half of Motherwell on Sunday, like that scenario, I thought was completely on the table.
Well, I think it also helps that our backline looked like Alistair Johnson, Cameron Carter Vickers, Liam Scales, and Greg Taylor, as opposed to Anthony Ralston, Navratsky, or Welsh, Liam Scales, and Bernabe. That also helps in the grand scheme of your structure and your play. I guess more notably than that, though, is the introduction of Iwata to the midfield, pushing Cal McGregor slightly further forward. Two conservative passers there, Alan, and I think the Matt O'Reilly one's an interesting one because sometimes there's just not an explanation for why someone is not playing well, and I think that's probably the case with Matt O'Reilly. I think he was just probably not playing well. Sometimes it has nothing to do with structure. Sometimes it just has to do with people not playing well. But in terms of what Awada does to the midfield with Cal McGregor, what have you noticed in terms of the way that Celtic play in the midfield as a result of that change?
Yeah, so I mean, yeah. So on Matt O'Reilly, I don't know that he's changed. I don't think he's radically different to the sort, because even when we think he's not playing well, he's still pretty effective, and his not playing well is within a fairly narrow range of performance, right? The problem has been that if Matt O'Reilly's not playing well, who is? Last season, Aaron Moy stepped up, Rio Hatati stepped up, somebody else stepped up, right? So if Matt O'Reilly was having a quiet game, it kind of didn't matter because the system kind of rolled on and someone else, you know, got a good load of stats that day, sort of thing. So I'm not. I think that's been the problem. It's been the quality deficit around the team as to who else. If it's not Matt O'Reilly, who else is gonna really step up in that midfield? I mean, Iwata again, like Yang. I don't think he's done anything radical. I don't think he's done anything new or different to what Iwata does. He's very, as you say, very safe on the ball. I think his anticipation and his positional sense of where balls are going to break and where there is danger, he's very good. And he seems to anticipate danger very quickly and get there. And he's got the strength to kind of shield the ball well. His recovery rate is high, and so forth. But he's not going to suddenly ping 40-yard through balls. Right? That's not never going to be his game and not be his game. And if we're going to play a midfield with him in it, McGregor is going to be suboptimal. In a more advanced position, he isn't that player anymore that's going to you know dribble past 3 or 4 defenders or get into the box and play, have great quality shots at goal. He never has been actually in terms of his strengths and weaknesses. So that introduces potentially risks elsewhere in terms of the overall midfield creativity, but it probably strengthens. And actually, my concern has been with Celtic has actually been defensively. Our numbers this season have not been great, and as you say, having something like the first choice defence in place certainly helped. I mean, Alistair Johnson had one of these games against Dundee. Do you remember we had 2 or 3 matches when McGregor played left back and he completely dominated the ball from left back? It created like 150 passes or something. That's what Johnson was like against Dundee, because Dundee played this 5-3-2, very rigid, no pressing, and Celtic just passed through them at absolute will. It was so easy to play through them. So everybody, and especially on the right hand side where we had O'Reilly in form, and we had Yang, getting a lot of the ball, and we had Johnson. Johnson, I think 122 passes he completed in the game. Set up 1 assist, a couple more chances that were set up, etc. So was that again attribution? Is that Johnson hitting his best form? Yeah, probably was. But how much it was the fact that Dundee were just tailor made for Celtic to play through with ease, which they were. So I come back to you know I don't see anything fundamentally changing. I think we've just got to hope that the coherence improves, and that's going to be a marginal thing. The quality of the forward play, better matching the skill sets of the players that we have. Um, and if Iwata makes us a little bit less prone to losing on the transition and makes us a little bit more solid, that's a good thing. Again, on the margins. So I think it's positive, but it isn't the radical thing I think we'd need to do, as James says, to make us really coherent. But at least we're edging there as we get towards the finish line.
As we head towards I don't know why I muted myself there when your dog started barking, but I did. As we head towards the Hearts game tomorrow, then at lunchtime, James, positive notes. We'll look at the positives here. There's a dozen games left in the season. Celtic have key players coming back from injury. We seem to have figured out at least a little bit of the system that we think might be successful until the end of the season. If it's not the long-term game plan, I don't care. But it's just getting to summer now and winning the league to get Champions League next year. So I'd be a little bit more positive about the coin flip scenario where that's going to land by the end of the year.
Yeah, so I had moved away from coin flip territory, and I think we're back to coin flip territory. So that is positive news. Like I if we hadn't have made the kind of adjustments that we have starting in the second half of Motherwell, I was pretty skewed heavily towards Rangers, unfortunately. Um, so so there's that relative to the rest of the league campaign, and when you get into coin flip, you're talking about variance and aerial crosses. That's an issue. Hart has been very good in the last 2 months. Will that persist? Let's hope. To his credit, he's been very good. Is that going? Could he have a couple of bad games? Certainly, anyone can. So it's that kind of stuff that it's right back to where we were. I'd say kind of in early January, which is probably coin flip territory. Uh, as it pertains specifically to Hearts, so I've been commiserating. With this, we analytics spreadsheet shagger community, we stick together in some sense, and so there's a Hearts account that I DM with, and we've had a back and forth recently, And I think Hearts are the team most vulnerable to collapse. Meaning that even with the amount of lead that they have over Kilmarnock, I could see a scenario. I mean, it's not likely, but I think, most models would have them as like, I don't know, 5% chance of finishing third, that kind of thing. I think that's way too low. Like, I think it's probably at least 4 to 5 times that. And that's because I think the underlying ways that Hearts have been winning games and pulling results are not necessarily sustainable. They've had a lot of positive things kind of going their way, and there's quite a bit of that that may not persist. Particularly, for example, they've been hugely reliant on Shanklin's finishing, even with his
Shankpen.
decision making when to shoot has been really poor. Right, so this goes back to decomposing like how teams actually score, and he's just been a brilliant. Now, he's been historically a good finisher. This season, he's been an unsustainably like Messi squared level of finishing. Um, so if he goes through a period of the opposite of a purple patch, their kind of underlying architecture is not good. Um, so I could, now the flip side of that is we're going to Tynecastle, and that's always a bandbox, tight, a lot of chaos, a lot of randomness that can, um, you know, creep into the game. But again, this is the kind of game where I'm not that worried about, meaning that particularly with the shift that we've made, if we stick with it, meaning if we stick with kind of 4-2-3-1 or 4-3-3 with Idah, and we kind of build around him, um, with the way that we've done in the last 1.5 games, then you know, relative to the rest of the games, I think Hearts are not as good as their table position suggests. And but the qualifier there is they still have Shanklin, right? So he could still score 2 goals, and if Hart comes out with a ninja kick on a through ball and gets a red card, right? So there's still a lot of variance built in here, but we should be able to create chances against them quite a bit. And so it's one of those games where we could win 3-2 or 4-2, that kind of thing is kind of how I'm thinking about it.
How are you feeling ahead of it, Alan?
Like James, I'm no more or less anxious about this game than any other game, in all honesty. Mainly because, as I say, I think there's so many performance variables in how Celtic play. It almost doesn't matter who we play. We might be brilliant, we might be awful, we might sort of muddle along somewhere in between. Probably be one or the other in either half, the way things have been going. Yeah, and I agree. Hearts. I've got an almost remarkable level of expected goals against underperformance in terms of I think they're conceding 1 goal a game, but they should be conceding 1.5, which is huge, right? So I don't know what's been going on there. I don't know if Clark has been exceptional or whether the opposition finishing has been dreadful, or what. I'm not sure. I don't follow their games that closely enough. And
More
as
of the
James sort of
latter. Almost a half a goal a game on bad finishing by the opposition.
yeah.
Yep.
So Celtic in theory have, and as they found out at Ibrox, where I think they lost 5 goals off of 1.5 xg that the home team produced. So that sort of thing they're kind of due to have had happen to them really. Whether it will happen against Celtic, we don't know. But so yeah, they're not nearly as good as perhaps the table suggests. I would say so in that sense. Yeah, it's going to be listen, but it's going to be because it's unlike when they go to Ibrox, you know that Hearts will be trying to be the best version of themselves when they play Celtic at home, as they normally are, and that it'll be rambunctious and it'll be physical and all that. So yeah, it will be tough, but um, I think what you can say is that Celtic are, as much as the attacking coherence and some of the defensive weaknesses are absolutely there, and the team at least is marching together, right? The divisions at Celtic are off the park, not on the park or in the dressing room, and around the manager and the players and the coaches and all that sort of thing. That's the important thing. So, that I think counts for a lot in terms of at least giving you the best fighting chance for these kind of tougher away games. But I think I saw that Rolls, who's probably their best defender, may well miss the game, and the other defenders, especially Kent, are not good. So, or is it Kent? Sorry, that's going to miss the game. Yeah, and Rolls can be really bad actually. So that again, that probably helps Celtic in that sense. And I think they are at least what I will say about Hearts is they do to a greater extent than anyone else. Though they do try and play football a little bit, do try and get the ball down, do play less long balls than a lot of teams do. So their issue might be, especially because of their relative lack of pace in midfield, just can Celtic transition and break on them quickly? And I think that would be the bit I'll be looking to see because our counter pressing has been pretty good actually.
Yeah, well, fingers crossed. We come away from this game with a win. We'll be coming back to this game and looking back at and analyzing it on the show next week. So make sure to subscribe on YouTube if you want to get that, or you can get us on podcast as well. Anything else before we finish up?
The only other thing I had was, an obvious one, but just touch upon the importance of Carter Vickers returning and hopefully staying fit. Just again, to my eye, he looks like he's not quite back up to 100% or anywhere near it. So hopefully, that's an arc that he's going to get better, fitness wise and just sharpness wise, because that would be a huge, particularly with this pivot in, theoretically, if we are pivoting more towards the horseshoe, so to speak, and control, that he could be a huge factor. So that's again another one on the margins that's a very, very important.
Mm-hmm. All right, that's where we'll leave the show then today. I hope you enjoyed the Saturday special on the Huddle Breakdown. If you did, be sure to hit the like button and leave a comment as well.
What, Mr. Producer, you going to get this out quick now, since we did this late in the week? Or are you offer a 3 martini lunch on a Saturday? How fast are we going to get this out?
Well, I thankfully live a very boring life, so I will be editing this straight away afterwards and getting it uploaded. Yeah.
All right, great. Thank you.
All right, thanks, guys. Chat to you later.